Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so I've tried to make this relatively informal because Paul said it was going to be informal, which means you guys have to ask questions and things like that. What generally I'm talking about is the cell phone platform, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with in many different ways. And this is a project I've been working on for, say, about 4 years now. And so it's kind of the culmination of some things, a lot of systems we've developed, and then looking forward to some areas where we're starting to think about applying some of these technologies. I'm also going to be doing this somewhat live just to show you, eat my own dog food kind of thing, and be able to do some demonstrations in the middle there. So I have in my pocket here, this is a Motorola E680 cell phone, and this is something that's commercially available primarily in Asia, I believe is where it's released. And we've been working with this platform for a year or so now. And so everything I'm doing is coming from this device here. Everything that's running on my laptop here and stuff, there's all very standard off-the-shelf kinds of components that you'll see. And so we haven't really done a whole lot of stuff on the laptop side except for some small glue software. So the basic idea is that this is my personal server, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And everything that I need is on here. So I have my presentation stored on here. And a lot of this is about making things much more seamless. So how can I get into this thing, connect to it, access my content, all that stuff. Ideally, this computer sitting here wouldn't be mine. It would be part of the university. So we have some things on here that just let us quickly access some web pages. And this is all stuff, again, that's stored on this device. And the presentation itself is also coming from this device.
So, I kind of got lost already. You've connected from what to what to make
we'll explain a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, cell phone, everything here in my pocket, too, and then my laptop, which is running the presentation.
So the slides are stored on the phone? Or
Yeah, on the phone.
And so you have a local Wi-Fi link?
Yeah, there's a Bluetooth link. It's all running Bluetooth. So,
okay.
yeah, although it's being really slow, or
so the laptop's only being used to connect to the projector.
There we go.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Now I got it.
Yeah. So I'm now actually going to give you the presentation. So basically talking about this transition from way back to the first cell phone bricks to where we are now with some of these modern day cell phones. Typically when people think about cell phones, and if you look at what most of the industry talks about and all the bustle and hustle about this stuff, it's this model where you have this internet out there with content on it of all sorts of kinds of things. It comes across some mobile broadband pipe to your device. So people talk a lot about streaming video now. It's sending pictures to the internet, MMS, phone calls, of course, SMS, all these things, ringtones, are all the stuff that's coming over the air to your device. And there's a lot of value there, and I'm not saying that isn't going to be a huge area going forward. The basic problem is, though, this little thing that you're dealing with still is very fundamentally limited in the screen. So when it comes down to it, do you want to be doing your work on this small device? And that one in the upper right-hand corner is the picture of this same thing I have in my pocket here. Or, many of you probably don't do CAD layout, but if, at some point you're doing something, you're writing a paper or something like that where you kind of need these bigger displays. And so this is really about how do you connect these two things together. Even though it's limited with the display size, there's a lot of very strong technology trends that are really making this possible. This one is just storage density. I have a 1 gigabyte SD card in here, and this is a couple years old already. So you can get ridiculous amounts of storage. Just think ahead, terabytes, pretty easy to project the kinds of things we're going to be able to carry around. The other huge trend that we're looking at is the number of these devices that are out there and just the entire ecosystem that's starting to exist. This is a chart from 2004, and you can see those little lines up there popping up here are the difference between the projected numbers, which somehow leveled off to like where it's actually went. You don't usually see these retrospective kind of graphs like this, because usually they're always projections off into the future, and then no one ever goes back and says, well, what actually happened? But there's just a lot of these devices out there, and a lot of them have Bluetooth in them, which is starting to enable some of these kinds of short-range connectivity capabilities. The other important part about this is, okay, well, that's a lot. Compare it to the number of notebooks that are out there. It's just small. A lot of people think of mobile computing as your laptop, and that especially happens when you're in something like the Bay Area or California or the US, where it's a very desktop, laptop-centric society, but a lot of places aren't like that. So these platforms these handheld platforms are very, very common now. And the other one, of course, and this is the Intel, perspective on these things, is just the processing capabilities that's starting to be available in these. They are definitely rivaling any kind of desktop systems that I started with when I was in school and you had growing up or anything like that, which able to do pretty capable things. And so we're really past the point where these platforms can do something, and it's just a matter now of hooking them together to get those capabilities out there. And then the last trend that we're playing around with is these ubiquitous electronic displays. And this is basically stuff out there that is potentially available for me to connect to do work with. Airplanes have things. Hotel rooms have TV sets, which can be used for various things. All sorts of displays in the environment. Home, work, cars, everywhere is starting to have these displays around. And so the trick is how do you actually connect to these displays and get the displays set up to connect to my content. But they're out there and they're coming, and there's a lot of initiatives out there, digital home initiatives, infrastructure in the workplace. It's going to start making all these screens out there capable for displaying this kind of content. So what we have then is the personal server. It's basically you have your personal device, which is the server for these large screen displays. It's a relatively general concept, and as you can see, the slides are used for slightly different things. Up there it says personal media server. Basically, a lot of the demonstrations we give center around media, partly because that's a very easy thing to show to people. And the other one is that in certain areas, that's what's very compelling to people. If you look at a lot of things now, people talk about podcasts and video and music and all that stuff, which is this consumer consumption of media. And so that's where a lot of this gets demonstrated, but there's a huge capability for other things outside of just pure media consumption. So what we have then is this is the rough architecture. I'm not going to go through the details of it, but this is basically a generic computer setup. What we have running on here is standard Linux with standard servers of all sorts of shapes and sizes. The key point here is that this device now is no longer very different than that device there or other computers out there. They're really becoming a peer in a lot of senses. And this is something that's relatively new. Before this latest round of phones came out, well, you had some PDAs that had these capabilities, but those weren't very common for a variety of reasons. Before that, phones were very stripped down, and a lot of phones that people have are good for making voice calls and SMS and maybe little things like that. But now, these things are full-fledged computers that can talk to other computers using all these standard protocols. So this huge dam kind of burst relatively recently, enabling a lot of this stuff. Question?
So you've got file and web servers. Is this something that I could actually set up an SSH server?
Yes. Yes. See, we have file web server. Yeah, so we have SSH. I'm trying to think. There's some other servers we have. You kind of lose track after a while. But yeah, it's a standard Linux distribution. And so, in fact, when we do our development work on it, we SSH into it. There's a telnet, actually, not SSH. But yeah, so that's how we get into the devices to do that. And there's a couple of custom servers that we write, just a little C program. Again, anything you can write anywhere else, you can port onto this thing. So, in a sense, what we're trying to do with this is there's this spectrum that you have with individual devices, where if you have your large display, it's sitting on your desk, it's what you want to do, your intensive work at, you're writing your paper, you're doing your design, you're watching TV, you're watching a movie, very heavyweight, very capable displays that are fixed in the environment. Then there's this transition to laptop devices, which are very popular now in a lot of segments, where you're effectively balancing off this capability versus mobility. And then when you get all the way down to these handheld devices, you're in this space where it's very mobile, It has a lot of latent capabilities, but you can't necessarily get at them because the screen's pretty small and all those other reasons I talked about. So we're trying to mush all these things together in this other space effectively by connecting them together. This is the kind of demo landscape, and I'll just go over this briefly and actually try and show you some of this stuff. But basically, it's a standard web page view into all this content that's stored on here. In fact, I'll just do it. So this is what we're always running. I was showing this presentation from the device. And this is how it works, is the data is stored on the device, and the application and all that stuff is already installed on the computer. So we're not talking about necessarily running PowerPoint directly on this device, but that's the kind of thing that is coming, and depending on how you want to work it, you can do that. So let's see, got a bunch of stuff there. For example, this is a bunch of media or photographs that are integrated with the device. And just to give you an example, so this is all running over Bluetooth. And this is just to show you the speed. So this is a fairly high-resolution photograph. If you zoom it in, it's pretty detailed. If I do the refresh where it actually downloads it, it didn't work. You can kind of see how long it takes to download, which isn't very long. So I got to be careful because sometimes these systems end up caching all these images and it'll show everything instantly, which isn't fair. So it's pretty easy to actually get at some significant content over Bluetooth. A lot of people kind of have had a lot of bad experiences with Bluetooth in one way or another. And some of those are just bad implementations of things and people's expectations of, and then you get hit with the bad implementation of it. But yeah?
So you showed us thought of the enormous market penetration of Bluetooth. What's the driving application?
Driving application is either the headset kind of thing or synchronization. So those are the driving applications behind this. And then a lot of this other stuff is starting to fall out because of that. And fortunately, comes with that, based on these standards, are some stuff like this, which is using IP over this link. And that's not something you do between your headset and your phone, but since it's in the standard, you pretty much get it everywhere. This is what I want. So this probably isn't going to work very well here. Another thing we can do is integrate some of this access here with the basic capabilities of the phone itself. And so this is, everyone has a camera phone, or it's a camera phone. And assuming this will work here. I don't know, it's kind of dark in this room, so I don't know if this is going to work out so well. But yeah, a lot of these pictures are various demonstrations I've given in various places. We have this huge collection of demonstrations. So I'm just going to... Oh, okay, yeah, it's going to be real dark. But this one's always a really fun demo because you actually get people involved. Usually they like, out of the way. I'll try. I'll take a picture of John because, look over here, John. Okay. So somewhere on here now, just refresh the page. My trip to Tahoe. The dark one. So you can see there, and that's all limited by the resolution of the phone camera here, which is a couple years old, which is getting better very quickly. But viewing stuff on this display up here is going to be a lot better than trying to browse through and find it on your little display here. So this is just a demonstration of how this capability can really help augment the basic phone activities that you might do. There's a lot of other things that you would probably want to do first, such as manage your contacts and those kinds of things through this kind of interface, which are technically possible. We just haven't done them. There's a lot of SDK and API kind of things to get access to that information, but it's all possible by the basic system. There's a lot of issues in this surrounding security and privacy and issues like that. One of the issues with Bluetooth specifically is it's very difficult to form the connections. And this is just kind of generally a problem with wireless connections in general. Often forming a Wi-Fi connection can be very difficult when you go to a new place. And then forming a secure one is also very difficult. And you have to type in these long keys, and it's just a big headache. And Bluetooth has the same problem. So one thing we've done, and I'm not going to show it, I'm already connected here, but is this tag here is an optical tag that is showing all the information necessary to connect to this computer. So the idea is that I can put that tag up on the screen, or it can be just sitting up on the screen. I push a button on my phone that puts it into tag read mode, and I hold it up to that image, and using the camera, it recognizes that tag, which will then automatically form the connection to this computer. Along with that, and you can kind of see, it's going to, oops, I missed it. Along with forming, you can kind of see in here, there's some Bluetooth address for making the connection. There's also a passkey, which is the encryption code to form the connection. So not only is this technique streamlining basically forming the connection, but it's also making it a lot more secure. Yeah?
Is that something to reconnect to a computer? Can you use that to connect to the first time? Copy that in?
Connected the first time. So basically how this would work is, you know, this computer would be sitting here just lying around, you know, installed in the podium or something like that. You know, I could come up to the computer, or it could always have this tag up. It would put up this thing. I'd push the button on my phone, hold it up to the tag. It would read the tag and then form the connection. So I don't have any pre-association with the computer. It's how do you quickly form these new associations. Typically with these systems, if you're going to places where you've been a lot, if you're connecting to your home computer or you're the one in your office, it's pretty easy to set things up so it's easy to connect to things you're familiar with. It's making these connections to things that you haven't seen before where it does become a lot more difficult. Yeah.
So how does that tag, why is that tag on the laptop if the laptop wasn't your laptop?
Well, it's so the idea here is that this basic infrastructure, the basic, you know, Bluetooth stack, the web browser, the PowerPoint presentation, and then the tag generating software would be kind of installed across the institution. So it's, you know, once you get something that has software value like that, and it's pretty small, it's actually pretty easy to get it fairly universally installed. It's just a software component. And then you can use that and assume that it has that, assume it has the web browser, assume it has, you know, file applications to then access your content. So.
But the cell phone tells it something to generate that particular tag?
No. The tag is generated completely by the laptop side of things. I have no communication with it. The cell phone is just reading the tag and using the information from the tag then to connect to the laptop. So. Well,
Is there any sort of trustworthiness built into the tag in terms of, you know, what's to stop a malicious computer from directing your handheld to connect to some other computer's
so the issue of, I mean, the issue of trust is a very complicated one. But in there somewhere in this model, there's some implicit applying trust to the system. You know, the fact that I'm going to use this computer at all means that I'm going to trust it to behave in a relatively well understood manner, that it's going to let me view my files and not go in and kind of totally destroy my computer, you know. And there's ways you can balance that trust, which how much access are you giving it versus not. The same basic issues come up, you know, for example, when you're going into a, not quite the same, but anytime you plug your computer into a network, you know, if you plug it into your home network, there's something you assume about what that network is like. And if I go to my friend's house, I'm going to assume something about what their network is like. If I'm visiting a company, I'm going to assume something about their network. If I go out to a public internet access point, I'm going to assume something different about those spaces. So there's a lot of different value propositions and trust propositions about these different spaces. And so you're right, you know, I have to place some trust in this infrastructure, but for a lot of these places, that's going to be something reasonable to do to a varying degree, depending upon what you're trying to do with the system. So, another question? Yeah.
Is the tag uniquely associated with the computer and it doesn't change, or is it generated every time you want to do a session?
It's generated every time. It basically has a random key in it, and it has the Bluetooth MAC address. And the Bluetooth address stays the same every time, but then the random key is regenerated every time.
So if you lose your connection, you have to reestablish.
Yeah, yeah. And if someone else comes along and tries to do it, they'll get a different key,
Okay.
and so you don't have that kind of effect there as well. Let's see, where was I? So there's a couple of other things. So let me do this other one first. I mentioned streaming media. So the idea here is this is video. This is the unstable part of the demo. You know, the basic hardware components that we have, this phone and this laptop, this is commercial off-the-shelf hardware. So we haven't gone in and been modifying these platforms very much. But there's an awful lot of software glue, and for the most part, the servers are standard. We're using the standard web server, SSH, file server, Samba, all sorts of things like that are standard. But it's amazing how much glue there is just to get all these standard things to work together. And so sometimes, I'll try this and see if I can get it working. There we go. This is all supposed to automatically work. It's using UPnP and some of those rendezvous-like discovery technologies, but it doesn't always quite kick in. So this is, again, content that's stored on my mobile device here. And it's very easy to do some things. I don't know if this is going to work. So if you can hear this at all. So listen to music that's stored on here. And this is actually a capability that's starting to come out now. Motorola has a project called iRadio, which is basically using this as a wireless music server as you go between home, car, and some other environments. So the basic capability for music is starting to get out there. Another interesting aspect, I already showed you photos, but we can actually do some pretty interesting things with video. So this is, again, a video that's stored on my phone, and it's getting streamed over to, wow, it's a new one. This application, by the way, is not something that my group wrote. This is Intel obviously did it, but it's designed for the digital home ecosystems that are emerging. So this is all these TVs and stereo systems and things that are supposed to connect into your home PC. So there's all these standards that are emerging around that. So really what we're doing then is we're taking those standards and applying them to this mobile platform. And for some reason, you may not get the video demo. Wow, that sure is disappointing. It's basically shows the Harry Potter trailer, and it's a nice full screen thing. The basic data rate for Bluetooth is 1 megabit per second, which in some ways seems pretty slow when you're comparing it towards some of these other higher data rate systems, but it's actually quite good for a lot of uses. I'm supposed to be able to show you the full streaming video there. Realize that most people who had dial-up connections or who have dial-up connections are dealing with speeds that are much slower than that. A lot of people's connections, their internet connections into the home are a lot slower than that. And it's not to say that it's not getting better and that people are having huge pipes into their home. The point is that those low data rates were sufficient to enable the explosion of the web. And there's an awful lot you can do with some of those data rates. So Bluetooth is already past what we feel is sufficient to enable a lot of these things. So another thing that, I'll come back to that. Pull this thing up again. So that's just a quick demo of some of these things. I don't want to fiddle around too long with the video thing because you spend all your time fiddling with that. After what I was going to do with the rest of the presentation after this was talk some about various areas going forward, how these platforms, and so all the stuff that I showed you here is stuff that we've done and have been working on for 4 to 5 years kind of thing. And then there's a variety of things going forward that we're looking at. So this is kind of a transition point. So I was wondering if there are any other questions, we've got a couple out there, about kind of this basic personal server model of, I'm carrying my content here, and then I'm just accessing it through other computers.
Have you worked on any on the user interface on the cell phone to do things that you would normally do on a laptop and make that more
Very little, kind of by design. Part of it was you kind of stepped in there and said, well, that's what a lot of people are doing, and so we're going to focus our effort on the other way. That said, there's a very few things that we have done. They're very kind of critical pieces. For example, in order to initiate connecting to an optical tag kind of thing, you need to select something on here. In order to take the picture on here, obviously, I had to do something. Another one that we've kind of played around with a little bit is what we call split trust browsing, and it kind of gets at some of these issues where you're using, and this would be more like an internet cafe, we're using the display there to access some sensitive information kind of thing, and then the infrastructure can split out, or not the infrastructure, the communications path can split out some parts of the communication that may be more sensitive and route those to your phone. And so you have your main browsing window up there, but then when you actually need to confirm something, select or enter a password or something like that, then you're doing it through this display. And so it's looking more at how this small display can augment what kind of interaction you would have in that case. But we haven't really looked at that problem kind of straight on. So, yeah.
So you mentioned you have all this content on this little device.
Right.
The two issues here, one is sort of backup,
Uh-huh.
and one is not revealing your information to others. So if a mother comes and takes your phone away, not only may you have lost all your data if you didn't back up, but also somebody else may have data that may be sensitive.
Right.
So what's kind of the philosophy that goes with these phones, and how would you educate the public to deal with that issue?
Right. So I think the backup one is it's very important. It's not difficult in a conceptual sense, but it's one of those things that's just really hard to get working right. On the other hand, I think a lot of people have been looking at that in various forms, driven by, oh, I have all my cell phone contacts on there, have all these pictures kind of thing. And so people are thinking about, well, how do I back up all this content from this mobile device to the infrastructure? And so there's been a lot of people aware of that problem, kind of looking at it.
When I plug my phone in and I charge the battery, why doesn't it just automatically do the backup?
Right. As I say, it's not technically hard. It's just for some reason systems don't do it for some reason that I don't quite understand. And so yeah, we kind of chose not to deal with that issue. The other one about my personal data on here and how does it get protected if it gets stolen kind of thing, I think is a lot more difficult in some ways, and gets into issues of authentication with this device. Right now people kind of assume this is your device and it's yours and you're somehow inexorably linked with it. But that's not the case, because someone could steal it, then it's not really yours anymore. And people talk about using this device to authenticate to some other system. Well, that kind of breaks down again when people steal it. That's not something we've looked at specifically. It's one of those problems that kind of aware of. And there's some things coming up on the radar, a lot to do with virtual machines and trusted platforms and some of those spaces, which start providing some capabilities for doing that. It's a way to have content that's somewhat protected, and then you still have to worry about the authentication piece, but at least from a technical perspective, you're able to protect it better. And there's similar issues with multiple domains that people may operate in. With I have a work life and a personal life, and how are you managing those separate domains in this one kind of personal device? So.
Well, it's kind of asking us about even what's coming up, as we go into digital home and then digital health and all of that. Somehow this other aspect of backup and privacy and security need to keep pace, or we're going to go through very dangerous years.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'm saying, we haven't dealt with this, that's exactly the problem.
I think, my feeling is the digital home stuff isn't really going to push it very hard, because mostly people are viewing media content which isn't that sensitive. When it gets into the digital health stuff, then yes. And I think people are aware enough of the problem in that space that it's not going to be a catch-up kind of thing. It's going to be much more that it is driven by the digital health thing. And before the digital health stuff can really roll out in a way that some people like to talk about, that's going to have to come with it. But I don't think the digital home space, I think there will be much more of this catch-up kind of thing where people don't really worry about it, and then something happens, they deal with it, and then, but no solution really comes down. So.
Do you believe, will we see near-field communication standards?
Yes.
And if so, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Platform design, something like that.
So the optical tag thing I was showing is one example of something that could very well be done with NFC. In a lot of ways, a lot better than the optical one. The optical one is nice because we already had the camera, and so we could do it now. Many devices are coming out with NFC, and so that's going to happen. And there's a lot of potential for like that bonding activity of connecting this device to this other device. Going forward, I think the way that we see that, and there's a lot of talk where people talk about using NFC for point of sale payments and things like that, which I think are perfectly great uses for it. Going forward, we're starting to think about then how things like NFC are useful for connecting together a body network of things. And this applies very much in the health space kind of thing, where you start having sensors and all these little pieces that you need to start coordinating together. And that's been a really big problem, I think, and people think about these systems is, okay, you can kind of get the demonstration working by getting all your things set up just right. Don't touch anything and break anything because then it's all destroyed. But getting these systems so it's flexible, so you can take one piece out, substitute with something else really quickly, that's the kind of space where NFC has a lot of capability to start really helping out the system come together.
What about NFC in the digital home?
I think in the digital home, there's some potential for, again, linking things together where I have my content on this phone here, and I want to play it on that screen up there. And so there's a lot of potential for me to walk up with the device and basically scan that device, or to make connections between in the home space. And again, it's getting at this notion of this is a great technology for allowing people to connect things together. And I think that's I'm trying to remember exactly what I read, but some of the standards that are going into NFC and the use cases put forth by Philips and some of those main drivers behind it are very much in that space. And so I think a lot of people are really kind of on top of that kind of thing already. And so it should start coming out once they come out in devices and these other things.
And finally, any comments about this platform as it might function in an automobile?
Yeah, right now there's kind of the first wave of ideas that are coming out of that, which is the fairly straightforward. You have your entertainment console, which is either the radio or your navigation system, or your stereo system to talk to your phone, which is what people can already do, or the TV display that's playing for the kids in the back seat kind of thing. So you get this fairly straightforward link up between this personal device, again, a lot in the form of a personal media server where, and this is something that Motorola has already announced pretty much is, I have my music stored on here, I leave it in my pocket, when I get into the car, I can play music from my mobile device through the car stereo. So there's this whole suite of things in that space which are fairly, I think, straightforward in coming. And some integration with the nav system starts to become a little more interesting because then you have some places you can store, not just straight off media. But I don't know. That's not a space that I've really thought about a lot. I don't personally, I actually commute by train, so I don't drive a whole lot. Yeah.
So there's this other application which is energy related, where the Energy Commission wants homes to get signals of real-time prices and then connect to all the appliances in the home
Right.
to decide whether you want to go on or off. I'm wondering if this kind of device is a good one, because they're not quite sure how to build the network infrastructure for that. At least they weren't the last time around.
So I didn't quite understand that.
So in response to the energy crisis, the Energy Commission wants to put smart thermostats in everybody's homes,
Right.
which will eventually get real-time price signals, or some sort of signal coming from the energy. And they've been asking themselves how to build that network infrastructure. So inside the home, there are a lot of people working on that. To get the signals from outside, they've been playing with, should it be over your own IP network? Should
Right.
it be, telephone? Should it be power line? Is there a device that would fit in there?
My first guess would be no, just because I think it's a bit too transitory and people are out of their home a lot, and the home may need to do something when they're not there. Or
A device like that could be just sort of
right. So I think
and used as the network.
yeah. So the basic
And it's got Bluetooth to all the devices.
Yeah, so the basic technologies could easily move forward and have this, effectively plugged in, and then provide that local network hub. That's something investigating going forward. Right now, this has Bluetooth in it and the GPRS connection, but we're looking at, and devices are coming out with Wi-Fi in them, but also having Zigbee, in these devices, and what does that mean? And so that provides that kind of natural bridge to that kind of home environment. So we just, speaking of which, home, but this is more media kind of thing. So basically there's a lot of rollout right now in the digital home space. And this has nothing to do with mobile devices. This is, I have my set-top box, which then lets me play things on my TV from my PC and yada yada, DVR that records stuff, and then I can transfer it to my laptop and take that around. And there's this huge amount of technologies that are getting put forth in this space. The interesting part for us then is, what does it mean to have this device be a conduit into and out of this space? And a lot of people like to talk about it in terms of outside in, which roughly means when I'm outside my home, I'm traveling around mobile, I can still get at content inside my home. But I think a much more interesting case is more of a sharing model with friends, where I'm in my home, I can view my stuff, but I go over to my friend's house and I want to be able to view my stuff on their TV. And so you start getting at some of these social sharing aspects of these technologies and how they're enabled by some of this emerging infrastructure that's coming into place into these home environments. An example of one technology that or capability that we've been looking at in this space, I had to put this in here because this is one place where I have some solid systems numbers that we've measured. So, which is looking at these devices now that have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on them. The basic problem is that Wi-Fi consumes a lot of power. It's great for covering a large area, but it'll drain the battery of the devices really quickly. So basically the idea is you have small isolated spots that are Bluetooth enabled, and then this is looking at the policies and capabilities for automatically switching between Bluetooth and Wi-Fi dynamically. So if you're just sitting there and you're not really doing anything with your device, or you're doing something simple like an IM or chat kind of thing, Bluetooth is going to be perfectly fine. Then if you decide to transfer a large file, a whole bunch of pictures, photographs, a movie to this thing, then it will fire up the Wi-Fi link, transfer the stuff over Wi-Fi, and shut it down. And do this all automatically without the user having to go in and say what they want to do, and fire things up, connect to this, and that whole kind of thing. So it's looking at how to automate the whole process. And basically by doing this, you can really drastically reduce the amount of power that this device takes. Not only because you don't keep the Wi-Fi active when it doesn't need to be, but also Wi-Fi is a lot more efficient at transferring these things than Bluetooth is. So if you do need to transfer something, Wi-Fi is better to use. Yeah?
So can you just explain what the 3 bars are on the slot on the
Oh yeah, sorry. Full is Wi-Fi in fully active mode. Then there's PSM, which is power save mode, which is kind of the standard power save mode for Wi-Fi. So if you have, usually your laptop will be in this mode, and basically puts it into some idle state for a while and occasionally wakes up and lets you do stuff. And then cool spots is dynamically switching between Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. These numbers are for some aggregate across a whole bunch of benchmarks in different cases, and so it's a kind of a conglomerate number, but it actually works really well and to be able to detect and do this switching situation.
They all, across those set of benchmarks, like you were saying, they each would offer the same basic performance as far as what you were trying to do, transfer files back and forth,
Well,
text messaging and IMing and whatever.
yeah, and they have very different requirements. For example, doing a file transfer, is very intense for however long you take it. Something like streaming video, though, actually has a fairly low, consistent kind of data rate that goes with it. And so how do you manage that kind of workload versus web browsing, which is very dynamic because you have some fairly small page loads, and then occasionally it'll hit some really big thing, like downloading a file or a video or something. And so there's a very dynamic case with something like web browsing. So, yeah?
So in this case, when you're in a cool spot, it'll actually shut down the Wi-Fi?
Yes. Yes. And the question arises, what happens when you're outside of the cool spot and you're in this larger Wi-Fi zone? And we kind of don't answer that question because it's kind of user dependent. I mean, you can either have your battery run down or you have to manually turn it on. You decide. That's not that wasn't what we were investigating. And it's going to be really interesting in the home environment too. I think Zigbee is going to be another good technology in this space because it has, yet again, different power range and performance characteristics that can help augment this kind of thing. There's a paper coming out in Mobisys on this. It has all the details and benchmarks and stuff like that. So another space that I've been looking at, and this is, what does this mean for this personal server here that provides music to go into a public space? And so you get a bunch of your friends, or go to a public cafe that's playing music there in the background. Well, what does it mean? And there's a couple of aspects that we looked at to investigate this. And one is there's a lot of privacy issues, potential privacy issues. And the realization in that space is that a lot of this stuff is actually about identity management. People want to share things about themselves often in these spaces. There's a lot of people out there that like to share music. They want people to know what they're listening to. And so if you really are just focused on the privacy angle of it, that's not quite the right way to look at it. And so it's a realization that it's a very tricky space with how people manage privacy and identity in these public environments, especially around something like music, which has a very personal identification aspect to it. There's a whole bunch of issues around the ecosystem, being who the service providers are, the businesses, the cafe owner, the people who bring music into the space, the people who take music away from the space. What are all their concerns in the space, and how do they work together to kind of enable this? For example, the Motorola Rocker phone that came out, which is a joint announcement between Singular, Apple, and Motorola, was a huge headache for them to get together because they all had different concerns and trying to figure out what they needed to do to get this service out there and get going. It's just highlighting that for a lot of these systems, it's not a simple, hey, I have this thing on my phone, let's do it. There's other people involved from a business aspect that make it very difficult. And also looking at some of the power efficiency of these devices. As I said, Motorola has this iRadio system where you're able to stream music from your phone to things around you. And it kind of enables this scenario. But it's horribly power inefficient. It ends up transcoding the content on the device, sending it across in a relatively inefficient manner across a Bluetooth link, and it just drains your battery faster than trying to listen to it on the device itself. Whereas if you actually just take the file, transfer the MP3 over somewhere else, it's much, much better. So you have to be really careful when you start looking at these systems, really what are you doing to this device from a power perspective. And so starting to also look at the healthcare space. We've had some discussion about this just a little while ago, but basically you have sensors on here. You have sensors on your body. How do you start connecting them together? How do you use things like NFC to connect them together? How do you manage the privacy of it or the security of the data on there? What are the capabilities of this device? There's a lot of momentum building up in this space. Just recently, Intel reorganized and formed a whole business unit behind digital health, which covers everything from desktop health care kind of things to hospitals to mobile solutions like this. And so it's not like that this is all forward-looking stuff. It's not mature yet, but there's a huge amount of momentum going into this space. And it's going to be really interesting. And there's some projects that we're starting up that look at taking this platform and making it much more amenable to being a healthcare-centric platform. Just wanted to throw this slide in here. This is something that Paul Wright and I actually developed back in 2001. And this was for the ME221? Is that the class? Yeah, which is a design class. And this was way back in 2001 when we were just starting to work on this personal server project. But we had a lot of these concepts in there in that class. And now they're really starting to come into the mainstream. And so it's a really good example of the university environment being a good 5 years ahead of where the businesses are starting to be. And so I think it's a really good timing there. And there's still a lot of interesting work to be done in this space. And just one last thing, and I know there's probably a lot of people here who are much more into the space than I am, so I'm not going to try and claim a lot, but just to highlight that these devices are have a lot of potential for a lot of these emerging markets. Just the economics of a desktop PC in this space, you're not going to have one per person kind of thing for quite a while. And there's this $100 laptop idea that's floating out that I'm sure you've heard about. And some people think that's good and some people think it's bad. So I'm not going to get into a big debate about that right now, but there's also the capability of this kind of form factor. I think the question out there is what kind of systems and capabilities and form factors are going to be appropriate for these markets. And I think the cell phone form factor has a lot of advantages over something like a laptop form factor for these spaces. Not only just cost, but just basic usage models and some other things in that environment. And pretty sure that's all I had there. So I don't know if there's any other questions or.
Must be lots more questions. Any more questions?
Maybe? I got them all out during the talk.
That's probably
All right, well, thank you.
What about the quality of service on that last kind of area, where the developing world
Right.
doesn't really have a reliable environment? Well, else is not so great either.
Well, I think what you really have to be careful of, and this is the big difficulty I found with doing research on this device in America, is that we're at least a year and a half behind what you can find in Japan. These other cultures, other places that are much more on top of mobile things than we are. So it's really difficult to do this research while I'm sitting at my desk in California. Sitting at my desk, not moving around, not being mobile in California. And I think you have to be really careful when you start applying to these other cultures what you're going to want to do. And I really don't think something like making a cell phone call is going to be as high on the list for a lot of these people necessarily for what they need to do with these devices. So I think my short answer is I don't know, but I would be a little bit hesitant to think that network reliability is necessarily what you need to do. A lot of being able to just move data around from place to place or be able to access it. They're willing. Some places people are willing to walk very large distances to do something. What they can't do necessarily is remember all the details or remember their health records or something like that. So you're not looking at this, oh, I need to make a cell phone call right away. You're looking at this, I need something that I can keep with me that's going to maintain some of these personal records.
All right, okay.
So that's a really good question. I think that's going to be the really difficult thing to answer going forward. So, yeah.
How about some of the open sourceness of the cell phone? Design software for it and make the platform a little more accessible for somebody that wants to go, okay, I've got this great new application.
So there's two basic impediments to that, which one is that the service providers like Singular have to be very protective of their networks. For example, if you had a completely open cell phone platform, you can go in and drop everybody's call from a cell tower. You can abuse it basically and do denial of service and lots of other bad things. And so, and before they're going to give you open access to something like that, the protocols need to change. There need to be some guarantees or something like that. And so there's actually a really big infrastructure piece that's going to be very difficult in that space. There's solutions there. You can isolate that part into a separate subsystem. And so you can't do that, without, you can't do that kind of thing. But right now, those guarantees aren't there. And so that's what makes it a difficult space to make it a completely open platform. Things like Wi-Fi coming to the phone and stuff make it easier because now you can do stuff over Wi-Fi and the cell providers don't have to worry about that. But then you get into other issues with them wanting to make money off of it. The other issue is with handset manufacturers. The space of these devices is much more driven by, or is very much driven by differentiation. They want to be different than other platforms. They want to be seen as special. They want to have cool capabilities. They don't really have a vested interest in having a common platform that everybody can build something for. That I have my one program that I can run on every single computer out there, which is how the PC world is. Right now, they don't have that perspective. They don't want to do that. So you're kind of fighting that front as well. So you can get access to a particular SDK for a particular phone and do some stuff on there, but it's not quite universal yet, and things keep changing, and it's a very so there's a lot of issues in that space as well. That said, Motorola has been working with several universities to provide access to the SDK for these devices, and then once you get that, it's Linux, and so you can do a lot of standard things. But there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through to get to that. And I think it's going to maintain like that for a while, just because of some of these industry momentum things that are built up. Yeah, a lot of it depends upon what you want to do too. There is open source SDK for some things, but you end up being kind of sandboxed in an environment that you can do what you want, what they want you to do, kind of thing, which is good for some things, but doesn't give you a lot of general research capabilities. A lot of these SDKs are driven by games, so if you could write a game for it, then you can probably do it. If it's something that you would want for a game, you can probably do it. And that'll change as people slowly figure out over time what you want to do. But to have a really open platform where you can really go in and do some things might take a little while to start to develop. So.
I'm not sure what limitations you're referring to. In Nokia phones, we have access to pretty much everything.
Right, but if you need to do, for example, some looking at, I mean, this is more in the space of sensor networks or something. I know people are trying to use these things for doing some multicast network routing kinds of things. SDK doesn't help you with that if the kernel doesn't support it. Doing some image processing kinds of things, you need access. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. We've had a lot of trouble. We find that people find some subset of things that kind of lets them do what they want to do depending on what they want to do, and it kind of railroads them into doing certain kinds of things. Part of it is if you're doing a UI, as I said, that's kind of like a game, whereas you have things here you're dealing with, then you're good. But if you're trying to do something like we're doing, where you want to connect into the device from somewhere else, send tags around, form connections, suddenly things don't work so well because they just don't provide those APIs. And so as long as you're doing something that's similar to everyone else wants to do, then you're good. So, yeah.
You talked about carriers protecting their network, and not only will they block the features of the phone, they also, you sign a contract, a service contract that says you will not use the phone for any service or function other than what they
Yeah.
Singular or Verizon.
What was that?
I don't read those things, but yeah, it's a tricky space, and the feeling there is that the dam's going to break at some point with a little bit, because there are some providers that are better with it than others, and at some point the theory goes that there's going to be enough services out there that some providers allow that then the other ones who are more restrictive are going to have to follow suit. That's the theory. We'll see. Again, the U.S. is much worse than other places. You don't have these same problems necessarily in Europe or other places because the carriers don't have the same kind of ecosystem set up around them. So.
But chat a bit more about this idea that several of us have talked about, and you included, where there would be some special connection to a variety of sensors for healthcare, for monitoring the environment.
Right.
So you need, and I think you used the word bridge at some point. You need
right.
some kind of bridge between that and the external world. And it goes along with Andrew's idea, questions about open systems and how you authenticate that. But I mean, that would be a powerful connection, right, where you can do that. And I mean, a company like, I'm just thinking of a company like Siemens that make general purpose sensors for a wide variety of, I mean, could you develop a collaboration with them where you have part of the system that's open to make that bridge and part that's closed to do the stuff you want to do?
Well, it really comes down to Motorola or Nokia, or I guess Siemens makes cell phones if that's what you were. But
well, they make lots of controllers and sensors.
That's not the hard part. The hard part is this platform, because this thing is so highly regulated. It has to be verified. It has to be contract. It has to be, they have to make this device, then they have to get Singular to accept it. Then they have to, that's the hard part. The actual sensor, that's relatively easy.
Well, I realize that. But
So,
I mean, it's the connection of all those things, right? So you need
yeah. So there have been people doing healthcare-related sensors for a long time, and there's a lot of really good stuff out there. And that's why the health phone area has a lot of potentials. There's this huge wealth of sensors and systems and technologies and things. It's really, once the dam breaks and you can get something that people can use this for, we think there's going to be this huge flow of capabilities that come out of it. So.
All right. Any final question? Nope. In that case, great.
Thank you.